Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Doomer Optimism podcast. We have three hosts today because we have such formidable guests that we needed three of us to be able to take them on. The hosts are Ashley Colby, Josh Heling, and myself, Jason Snyder. And our special guest today is Gregory Landua. How are you doing, Gregory?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be here and take all three of you on at the same time.
It's an unusually confrontational frame for our discussions.
I'm trying to set it up confrontationally so we disappoint the audience afterwards. It's only fair because I was like up against you and Matthew Perkowski on your podcast, Gregory, and I don't know, that's pretty formidable. That's pretty formidable. So I thought I'd get you back, you know?
Yeah. Fair enough. Are Matthew and I really on the same side? I mean, maybe generally speaking, or like, anyway.
No, not necessarily, but I definitely felt like I was presenting the counter argument.
Yeah, you definitely were playing devil's advocate.
Yeah. Although it was a co-exploration, so yeah. I thought it went very well. Yeah. Well, without further ado, Gregory, why don't you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about who you are, where you come from. You have a background in permaculture, and you've been around these regeneration scenes for decades, from what I understand. So you're kind of a veteran at this point, but still very, obviously still in your prime and going. So why don't you talk about where you come from and what you're doing now?
Sure. Yeah. Where shall I start? So, I mean, I'm an elder or geriatric millennial, I guess. So, I grew up in Alaska. For the most part, I studied environmental science in college, and sort of did a bunch. Environmental science is this beautiful. If you're gonna do something in academics, it was attractive to me because of it interdisciplinary by nature, right? It was a melding of different disciplines that included, the social sciences. I studied a lot of ethics in school. I did a lot of, so I was kicking around the philosophy department a lot, but I was also doing terrestrial ecology, population ecology, some climate science, some marine ecology. So I got to kind of like mix it up and do a lot of different stuff in school. And I always sort of joke that environmental science, like people say, economics is the dismal science.
Yeah.
And I think, number one, I'm not convinced that economics is a science. And number two, the real dismal science is environmental or climate science.
Yeah. What do you think about ecological economics? Do you think that's legit?
Look, when I was in school, there was nothing that made me angrier than the ecological economics classes that I took.
Angrier because the classes just sucked, or angrier at the world for not adopting it sooner?
The classes sucked, I guess. I don't know, maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it, but I felt a deep unease when I was learning these theories at that time. And like, look, my thinking has changed a lot. So I'd probably be pissed at myself. My younger self would be pissed at my older self, perhaps. But at that time, I definitely would say that, in those classes, the ideas that it simply isn't expensive enough yet, and when it is, we'll take care of the environment, made me really angry. I was just like, I wasn't into that. And in a way, I'm not anymore, although I think I'm more sympathetic to the way that those arguments can be used to help change certain people in society's behavior. I'm like less, I'm like less like, oh my gosh, I'm mad that this is, and I'm more like, okay, cool. Like I'm happy to use that point to help sway somebody towards doing the right thing. So
I'd like to understand that your younger use anger with the idea, because I'm curious. I could imagine a couple of different broad approaches to finding that a framing discipline. One would be sort of prima facie that it's an inappropriate it's an inappropriate lens, that it's not a question that reduces to economics. There's some other value that should be addressed, and the other could be pragmatic, conceding that an economic approach is acceptable. We could say because of externalities or whatever, it work. So I'm curious of which of those two approaches. Maybe you had a different critical, but which animated your pleasure with the field.
I had a little bit of trouble, Josh, fully getting that.
Sorry.
Just a little in and out.
Well?
Yeah, your audio has a little bit of echoing back and forth.
Let's see what I can do about that. Why don't you guys continue? I'll make some tweaks here.
Jason, if you can help me parse that. I think I kind of got like the general thrust, but I'm not 100% sure I could answer it with precision.
Well, let's just chill a little bit, because I don't think I quite got it either, and we can have Tress cut this part out.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is this any better?
Yes, I think that's better.
Okay, great. We'll stick with this. I changed mics. My question was, with regard to your younger use aversion to environmental economics, or ecological economics rather, I could imagine two sort of really different approaches to a critical view of them. One that would just say, values-wise, a sort of utilitarian economic-like decision-making framework is inappropriate for, say, an ecosystem. It's just the wrong kind of way to approach it, regardless of effectiveness. And the other would be more pragmatic, because of, say, externalities or other sort of problems with an economic approach, that it wouldn't produce the desired result, that it wouldn't successfully function to incent the behavior that we want. And I'm curious if maybe your disdain came from yet a different direction, but I'm interested in your reaction to sort of the why at a broader level.
Yeah, no, I think at that point I was very uncomfortable with the utilitarian ethics as the foundation for an environmental ethics, or sort of like the foundation for sort of societal transformation. I think that was the primary discomfort I had. And I definitely, like, I would say, although that like, I'm specifically thinking of a class, like a 300 level economics class that I was in, that was, I think, ecological or environmental economics, that I was like, this is, it makes me cranky. I do have to say, since then, I have spent an awful lot of my adult life kind of dwelling at that intersection of ecology and economics and business, sort of finance, I guess you might say, which is a little bit like less on the macro and more on the micro. Just how do businesses work in a way that produces ecological health as an intrinsic part of the business operation?
Sure. And that makes sense. I mean, it would be, I think there is a pragmatics to that I think fits with that story, and certainly makes sense with where you've ended up now, which I assume we'll talk a whole lot more about as the conversation continues.
Yeah, so it's probably worth sort of fast forwarding through. I mean, college was a little blip, and really what's interesting is what happened afterwards, I think, which is I very stubbornly refused to, in quotes, like, get a real job. I was privileged enough. I put myself through school fighting fire and fishing in Alaska. So sort of like working class college student in a way. And then, I basically, the thing that I found that resonated with me in this academic trajectory, another just like note, I took a gap year and studied abroad in Ecuador. So I didn't go straight to college either. I took some time. I went because I wanted to. and I went and I studied, and I immersed myself. I loved it. It was fun. And then after I got out of college, I was very enchanted, I guess you might say at that time, with permaculture, like the intersection of permaculture and the eco-village movement, which at that time was sort of, coming out of the, eco-village and permaculture. Felt like those were communities that were actually experimenting in the right way, and where there was some optimism in the doomer, where it wasn't just dismal and like horrible, and where there were humans who were asking the question, how do we envision our role on the planet in a way that is uplifting to us as human individuals, as family units, as communities, and also is leaving, the ecosystems we're inhabiting in a better way. And I sort of always stick with Rafter Sass Ferguson's definition of permaculture, which is meeting human needs while increasing ecological health as like the primary sort of thing that's going on. And sure, yeah, we have a design science, we have some ethics, but really this is an inquiry, and so I sort of dove into permaculture. I made that the foundation of my vocation, and just started iterating around that and letting my curiosity sort of guide where I was going, as a, in quotes, career. And so there was a lot of, a lot of living very close to the bone, I guess. I in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, being a permaculture, like a young permaculture designer, was not really a lucrative business to be in. and I was very happy, and I learned a lot, and I managed to sort of like hard scrabble together a vocation and a life, and put that together, and eventually that, in a very iteration and exploration and inquiry, that road led directly to the founding of Regen Network. Really, it's a very direct, I wouldn't consider there really to be any major pivots. I've been sort of on a trajectory of exploration that's led to this moment.
What I'm curious about, so you're kind of characterizing this as continuous, like, eco villages, permaculture, and now you're really interested in the opportunities with crypto, with digital technology, and with finance. Do you want to trace out a little bit more, like, what that, kind of continuous trajectory looks like?
Sure. Well, I think always, let's sort of back up, I guess. So I've always been very interested in the sort of the economics of permaculture, or the finance of permaculture. So back in 2007, a group of us put together this event, which was pretty formative in my life, called the Financial Permaculture Workshop. And we convened a group of people in rural Tennessee, from all sides of the political spectrum, from all walks of life, leaders in the community, people from around the world, really, and nationally, and did this like very interesting participatory workshop in which we were encouraging people to design regenerative enterprises and in an ecosystem in which they were related to one another, and inputs and outputs, and just like kind of like engage with what that was going to be. And layered in that were explorations around complementary currency stuff, and preceding that and after that, the economics of regeneration were something that was a primary focus of my personal inquiry, but in a very practical and sort of folk research sort of way. I founded a chocolate business to try to see if there could be, to try to crack the sort of like bioregionalism into multi-local bioregionalism, right? At that time, I had this instinct that if you're too hyper-local, you like lose something. Bird species migrate. Humans have been nomadic and moving across landscapes forever. That, you know, we have to regain our sense of place and our commitment to place, but also that needs to be nested and in relationship to other places, right? And so this concept of trade and economics and using monetary devices and instruments and finance has always been very central, and I think is also very central. You know, if you read, Bill Mollison had a whole thing on invisible structures and land trusts and, you know, sort of permaculture economics, chapter 14, and he did lots of talks on it as well. So I found the roots there, and that was really a strong part of my focus in the world of permaculture. I mean, sure, I was doing you know, herb spirals or whatever, but and swales, but not so much. I actually came more from the sort of Darren Doherty, agrarian, broadacre, you know, PA Yeoman, keyline design, and then, you know, vocationally, what I was doing to make money was building pretty complex financial models for working farms. I mean, that's what I was making money doing, was working with commercial farms that needed to make money while regenerating their ecosystems, not the sort of like, yeah, just like there are different schools of permaculture, not to like throw anybody under the bus, but I was very focused on this sort of like, how does this turn into real businesses that have an interface with the existing economy, right? As much as I maybe have distaste around that or have an aesthetic desire for the world to be abstract and different, it really, the discipline is, how do you make a living now in a way that's transforming the now into the future that you want your grandkids to be living in, you know? So Jason, I don't know if that answers your question about sort of the seeds, how I see the continuous evolution and the seeds of Regen Network back then, but you know.
No, I think it really does. I think it really does. And it does seem continuous. No, I mean, you're right. You know, what is the economics of regenerative agriculture or even permaculture? I'm curious, in terms of kind of thinking about economic models before we even get into the finance and Regen Network stuff, kind of models of economics. Did you experiment with like cooperative structures or, I don't know, like I'm curious, I guess, like how you thought about surplus sharing and kind of how democratic the workplace is in terms of deciding workplace operations and how profits were reinvested or, you know, spent, you know, within the larger network. I'm wondering how you thought about that and how you navigated that.
Yeah, thought and think. I mean, it's a present moment. It's very much a present moment conversation. So yeah, I definitely have been part of several co-ops. I see Ashley's with us. Hi, Ashley.
Sorry, I had some technical issues, but I'm here catching up now.
Awesome. Good to have you back. So yeah, I have sort of founded and been part of worker-owned cooperative structures. The business that I used as my primary livelihood vehicle for like 12 years, Terragenesis International, was, you know, a member-owned partnership, which is essentially, you know, it's like equal vote. I mean, the distance between that and a worker-owned co-op is, you know, not a lot. This lights just almost went out on me, it looks like. Hopefully I'm still with you. I've worked with a lot of farmer cooperatives or farmer associations through the years. I think my interest in kind of, I guess you could say, platform cooperativism is very alive and well, and I think is represented, it's part of the reason why we're at Regen Network, we're excited about some of the, blockchainy technology, because essentially what that is a group of people owning a financial infrastructure together. That's what's going on there. And so democratizing the governance, embedding markets and commons is something I'm very passionate about. I don't see markets and commons as some sort of like polar opposite set of things. I see, people come together, they make agreements with one another, they articulate those agreements, a la Eleanor Ostrom, and markets can be a part of that. Market mechanisms can be part of the agreements we have with each other. And there's a strong cultural lineage of that in the sort of like Euro-American tradition and preceding that. I mean, in many sort of like in quotes Western cultures and Eastern cultures too, markets are part of our societal fabric, and we govern them. Right. And so I'm definitely a re-embed markets and commons kind of a person, I guess you could say.
Nice. Well, Ashley, you just came back in. We've been going through kind of Gregory's background in permaculture and eco-villages and how he got interested in the financial and economic sides of that. So that's where we are now.
I'm wondering, did you talk at all about your critique of the permaculture, I don't know, theory of change, or the culture of permaculture, the culture of intentional communities or eco-villages, or what? I'm really curious about like the social side of these things, because I feel like part of what we're trying to navigate here is like culture, like the culture of all of this stuff, I mean, all of the market-based things and regenerative things and activities, they're embedded in cultures. And so I'd be super curious to hear about that if you haven't touched on it yet in depth.
I haven't touched on it, and happy to go there. Yeah, I mean, I think sort of how to sort of go about this. Permaculture's sort of its own worst enemy. And in a way, I think, so I'll dissect each of them with, some fairly brutal takedowns here. So permaculture,
maybe it'd be interesting to know, like, not just your takedown, but your own personal experience. Like, how did it intersect with your life? You did what, and how did that influence your understanding of these things? Because I think a lot of my biography ties in with my critiques, just having traveled to different intentional communities, etc.
Totally.
I had an experience with it, so I have critiques based on that.
Exactly. I have a very deep experience with both permaculture and the intentional communities movement. And I'll start with the critique, and then I'll talk a little bit about my experience. I was explaining my livelihood was very wrapped up in permaculture for a long time. And in a way, I still would consider it. Also, for a variety of reasons, we sort of very intentionally started using the term kind of before it was cool of regenerative agriculture, because we were specifically wanting to focus on people who are interested in engaging with the existing marketplace. And that's one of the things that I think permaculture, at least when I was embedded in it, and I'm a fifth waver, right? I'm a fifth wave permaculture person. There's been several waves after me, and
I don't know about all these waves.
Kudos to permaculture. It's really an amazing global phenomenon. It's amazing. And it's beautiful and it's great and it's been inspiring and life-changing and totally changed the way I think about the world. So that's very much there. I also think the challenge with permaculture, as it is in so many of the vanguard, in quotes, sort of like scenes, is that there's a huge amount of I think people will actually sabotage the movement's success in order to continue being unique. Because people so deeply identify with being the fringe that gets it. Instead of, and that's my biggest critique about permaculture in a nutshell, is that many of the leaders and many of the people, if you gave them the opportunity to actually change something, they would actually not do it, because then they would no longer be the only people who get it. And so, and I think that critique also somewhat works for the eco-village movement, but it's different. You know, the intentional community and eco-village movement, my big critique would be many of the people who are in that movement are there because otherwise they can't make friends. And so they're trying to like force social connections through contrived community governance processes. And sort of like they're sort of like using intentional community as a tool for healing from their traumatic experiences. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. Actually, I think it's good that people get together and heal, right? And I just had some other work that I wanted to do. So
I'm shocked. I'm actually shocked at how radically honest you're being about this. I think these critiques they resonate with me. There's definitely validity to that. I've never heard somebody put the eco-village thing that way, and I think
they're all going to be mad at me, and I love many people in that, and I love many of those communities, and I have myself probably been as guilty of that, and that's part of why I'm self-aware about it, you know. And it's just like, you know, if you're going to, you know, again, you sort of mesh those two critiques together, and I think we actually need a siege. We need it to not be a big deal to be living in a good way and having the earth being taken care of and our communities being taken care of. That can't be something that we're self-identifying about, like, this is what makes me cool because I get it. That can't be it, right? And
right.
And so therefore, you know, we have to look, and this is like part of what's driven me towards what the work we're doing at Regen Network is. How do you actually, where are the intervention points in which you shift a systems dynamic so that it is just the way that it is, and people can express their uniqueness and their coolness in other ways?
I want to let Josh go because I know you were on the cusp of saying something, but I just want to say that what really resonates with me about what you just said is I have come across so many communities that like revel in this nicheness, and then also sort of complain constantly about how niche they are. Like environmental sociologists do this. They're like, oh my God, like we're just ahead of the curve. We think of everything. Like we're the only ones who understand the problems with, the environment in the way that we do. Why can't we go mainstream? And so I think, like, to me, it seems pretty obvious that your project is about becoming mainstream, about bringing these principles into the mainstream using, various tools, which we'll get into. So, but I just want to say that resonates. Josh, you go ahead.
I was going to say very nearly the same thing. I mean, ultimately, all of these efforts are sort of, it seems to me, intending to take things in a certain direction, and things will not possibly go in that direction if they are the providence only of the fringe. Just by definition, it's not going to happen that way. We require a way to take those fringe things, the important parts of those fringe things, and move them into the mainstream to some form of scale. right? Which obviously we need to be very careful about, but they need to be more widely adopted in some manner.
Yeah. And well, and then I guess the question then is we can start to get into like for me, like the main goal for me here in this conversation, and we've like crossed paths so many times, it is like, I think basically what you're trying to do is to reinvent a whole bunch of different institutions at once to be able to like solve multiple problems that are overlapping. And so there's so many critiques because it's like so many of these problems are incredibly wicked and difficult. And so I feel like my role, at least the way I think of myself with regard to doomer optimism, is to think about like being a skeptic as a friend, like being a skeptic as a person who might make an idea better and or make it more legible to a more mainstream audience, you know, by being a rube or whatever. So I think maybe it's useful to just start like, I don't know if guys have gotten into like how Regen works, but like, what's your elevator pitch on Regen? What, like, it just pretend that you're talking to my in-laws who are visiting me right now. Like,
what you're not gonna like
Should
this.
we bring him in?
My elevator pitch is, I don't do elevator pitches. You got to take the stairs.
All right, 3 flights. Let's go.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so let's zoom back a couple steps. And I will share some assumptions that I have about the world instead of trying, I don't want to like pitch anybody, but I do want to be clear about like, what are my assumptions that they may be wrong or they may be right, but they're driving my decisions and they're in some way embedded deeply into the work that's happening at Regen Network because other people resonate and share those assumptions, I think. So, and I was going to try to articulate this. I'm so sorry I didn't get this stuff out in a doomer optimism manifesto, and it's just been like too madness. But I'll try to like free form it here. So assumption number one is that all value is a social construction.
Wait, hold on. I actually want to know, Josh and Jason, do we all agree? Do we thumbs up this assumption? I say yeah.
It sounds a little bit too postmodern to me.
But we're going to get to how we fix that.
I think we have to take ecological realities seriously. I don't think ecological realities are.
You didn't get to my next point.
Okay. Well, okay. Sorry. I shouldn't have done the thumbs up thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the next point is we need to create mechanisms for our social construction of value to be deeply sourced from and related to ecological health.
So to try to sort of, in the spirit of Jason's hesitance on assumption number one, to try to relate those two, values of social construct, but we can only sort of productively construct it within some bounds, and those bounds are understood with regard to ecological health.
And there are things that aren't social constructs. I'm not saying that everything's a social construct. I'm just saying value,
right?
And the things that we use to symbolize it, like money and this, that, and the other, is a social construct. There are other things that aren't social constructs, and that's sort of like reality, ecological reality. And yes, we're like running headlong into this reality wall. And I would totally resonate and agree with that. That's not a social construction. That's a sort of like, that's a much bigger, you know, we're nested in this biosphere and it has hard boundaries. And you know, we need to live within those boundaries, and we need to build social agreements and cultures that, you know, live within and, you know, maybe grow those boundaries from time to time if they're going to have a boundary relationship. And what I mean by that is we can grow soil, we can grow forests, and we can have climatological impacts that are actually sort of like mitigating extremes and building ecological resilience and all of these things. You know, we actually have the capability to do that, and we have the capability to design that into our economic relationships, our business plan. We have the full capability to symbolize that in many different ways, and there's many moments in history where people did, in fact, symbolize agreements both between humans and between humans and the greater than human world. That's not actually like a radical, crazy new thought. This is
Wait, I don't know about this. What is like a historical example of this? This might be helpful to me.
Well, I mean, I think so. I'm sourcing in my sort of like anthropological or historical analysis of the world. I'm sourcing kind of from three major places. So place number one is like David Graeber, sort of 5,000 years in some of his other works, and you might say like the associated other sort of like left-leaning anthropology people, because there's a whole like lot of cool stuff there that's kind of fun, right? And then I'm also sourcing from a much more heterodox than David Graeber even source, which is a teacher of mine that I've been studying with for a very long time, Martine Prechtel, who teaches a school called Boled's Kitchen in New Mexico. And so a lot of my thinking has certainly been deeply influenced by his teaching. And, you know, and then my time at Gaia University. So Andrew Langford has also been pretty influential in how I think about a lot of this stuff. So let's just unpack like wampum, because I think understanding what Regen Network is actually doing, we need to know what wampum is, what it was.
I don't know what that is.
Wampum were the beautiful shell beads, right? So wampum, specifically wampum is the quahog shell, which are purple and white, they're super hard. They take forever to drill. And if you can imagine, before metal, like talk about proof of work. It took a long time to make that freaking little wampum shell. It was very rare, right? And it took huge amount of energy, and every single one was deeply meaningful. Prayers, songs, put in, ritual, making the entire thing. And wampum, giant wampum belts were created, and they had the designs, they had the symbolic representation of the world that was being lived into existence by the people who were making those wampum belts. And they were used both as a medium of exchange between people and as a symbolic representation of treaties between people. And these people that I'm talking about are the people from the bioregion that I live in and adjacent. This is sort of like the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Abenaki people, the, you know, and a number, all of them sort of like Northeast original people were trading and utilizing wampum. And again, for treaties between people. And so like when we, you know, when we as sort of like people of European descent are sort of dismissive of like, oh, Manhattan was, you know, bought for some beads, and we sort of like are dismissive of that. What we're not understanding is that those beads were actually like deeply, deeply, deeply valuable, and they were deeply meaningful, right? And then there was a whole thing there that happened, right? Okay. And also for like 100 years, the colonial people also were using wampum as currency. They weren't using other things. So there's this whole like history of money thing that's very interesting. Oh, this is a medium of exchange. Oh, wait, it's also, is it art, or is it a treaty, or is it an agreement between the people and the wild that they're living in? Yes, it's all of those things. That's what wampum was. And that's an example, that's one example of a way that the social and cultural construction of value we have a historical precedent for how it can connect people back into relationship with place and into relationship with one another, right? In a deep and beautiful and spiritual way. It's pretty cool. I mean, at least that's our sort of like, you know, looking from the back, and we can apply all of those judgments on it and be excited.
Yeah, I just want to say, I don't have a follow-up question. I'll let Jason or Josh go, but I just want to say I'm getting the same feeling like I got when we were talking to James and Eli, where it's like this cool, like sort of mystical, psychedelic, like very, I don't know, hippie perspective, but then like applied to like a very type A organized organization. I don't know, it's a very interesting phenomenon to me, and I definitely think it's like a thing where I don't know, this generation of people who are exploring solutions have this like interesting, I don't know, it's like back to the land 2.0 where you're bringing some hippie or mystical perspectives, but like, all right, but let me bring the full force of like spreadsheets to this. Josh or Jason, did you guys have a follow-up?
Well, I just want to know if you have more assumptions or more values. So
that was my question.
Yeah. So assumption number 3 would be that the current trajectory of the world is the financialization of natural capital, and that the next 50 to 100 years, in quotes, and we could unpack why I'm like doing the air quotes around natural capital, but natural capital will be actually the most important set of assets in the global economy. That will actually be the foundation for what we think of as actually like capitalism or capitalism 2.0 or something. That's an assumption I have. I think that that's how, you know, like if you were to fast forward, look back 100 years from now, what I just said is going to be true, whether I do it or somebody else does it or nobody does it. That's actually just where things are going. So that's an assumption I have. And that may be, people may disagree with that.
Is the sort of internal mechanism that you imagine behind that assumption fundamentally scarcity based? I mean, do you see it becoming most valuable as the other side of a scarcity / exhaustion coin?
That, and as a artifact of just my take on the zeitgeist or gestalt of where we're at as a society. You know, you could be a hippie, you could be marginal, you could be a QAnon supporter, you could be in the Davos crowd. And in some way, everyone everywhere is talking about something that relates to sort of like the financialization of nature. And the only people who are like rabidly against that, there are people who are rabidly against that, and they're sort of like, they hate money, period. Right. And they're like, that whole thing is just a horrible mistake. And they, you know, there's a group of those people, and they could be wrong. I just think historically, everybody else is going to steamroll right over them, whether they're right or wrong. So I'm not making a prescriptive judgment about the morality of this. This isn't something that I want or don't want. I'm just, my assumption is we're going that direction, basically.
That makes sense to me.
This relates to a quote, a recent tweet where you said, you know, woke, refi, efficient carbon markets, bespoke, refi, financialized inner being. And this raised our eyebrows.
Wait, repeat it, Jason, repeat it.
Slower. Well, the whole thing or just the last part?
Yeah, the whole thing, yeah, woke.
So woke, refi equals efficient carbon markets.
Okay.
Bespoke refi equals financialized interbeing. And I guess a question that immediately comes to mind is, interbeing implies more than just our relationship with natural capital, it implies our relationship to each other, interpersonal dynamics. Do you see this financialization applying to, say, our marriages, our relationship to our kids? Where are the boundaries of this financialization?
Does already, doesn't it? How does
What do you mean?
financialization
Yeah, you gotta say
not
what you
relate? Just wait a second.
Okay, okay.
Can you defend that financialization does not have any deep and insane role to play in like how people choose their mates and spouses or how they raise their kids?
Well, but wait, we need to be careful because there's the way you've asked that question. I mean, of course it does, but it doesn't follow from that the financialization sits in between those relationships. So my family and I may participate together, right, in the heavily financialized world, but we haven't. I'm not. There are no options contracts available on my kids.
Neither does my tweet presume that you're going to necessarily be like, necessarily having a transactional relationship. I also think, though, if we step back, what I'm trying to say is by going through this like singularity, because value is socially constructed, what we think of as transactional and what we think of as money is going to be very different on the other side of this. So like, that's another assumption. That's like maybe assumption number 4 is that, do I think that people are going to be like paying US dollars to each other in their marriage? No. Do I think that some people are weirdly transactional in their relationship? Yes. Do I think that sort of like unit by unit financialization and like quantification is actually where this is going? Not necessarily. Like in the same way that wampum was a unit of account, a marriage belt, a treaty belt, a agreement between a tribe and their neighbors and the greater than human world, in which they were making agreements about where they were going to go and ritualize and when they were going to plant their corn, and they were singing that all into the belts. There's something there that's like happening and is going to continue to happen, and it's going to happen through the tools that we have available to us with our opposable thumbs and our brains and other things. We're going to be manifesting that as culture, and it's just, it's going to be the way it goes down.
So I'm still not quite following, and perhaps I just don't have a clear enough sense of what you have in mind with specifically, financialized interbeing. Is perhaps an example, like a forward-looking example, possible?
Yeah,
I mean, you're mute. And wait, Gregory, I guess I would just tack on to that. Is there, okay, you've got your 4 assumptions. Is there like an elevator explanation of what Regen does?
No, not yet, but I'll keep sharing. I got a couple more assumptions.
We're inching there.
Okay,
I got a couple more assumptions.
And we're taking the stairs. We had to stop.
We are, yeah.
I'm
fine. I can handle it.
And we may stop in different landings and like go on the floor and like check out what's going on, and then
Good
like
for my
maybe we'll go back down to the prior flight, and like we'll see where we get. So another assumption is that, like zooming out, some of this has been philosophical, some of this has been more just like practical, like the assumption that natural capital will be the most important asset class of the 21st century. Like that's something that I would share like in an investment pitch to somebody, right?
Sure.
And then the next one that I would share after that is that, the financial infrastructure of the future is digital. So those would be like the two things that I would share. And I think that's like, whether or not I like it, this isn't me saying this is the world that I want, just to be clear, Ashley. This is me saying this is the world that's becoming.
I know, but we have this whole conversation we need to have about like whether or not it's a good thing and or something we should be promoting to digitalize everything in the analog. No, I'm not saying everything. I know you don't want to digitalize everything, but to make everything that's analog digital is a process that has it has an impact.
Totally.
It takes people to do it. Being viewed and monitored and observed has
Yeah, we'll get into
impact.
the panopticon thing. We'll get
I mean,
into
like
that.
it's not just the panopticon,
we'll get
it's
into
like
that.
just being observed has an
that's the
impact,
sixth floor.
you know? Okay. Well, I mean, we'll get there. We're not gonna
We're gonna climb up and we'll dive deep into the panopticon, and we'll explore that. And I have my fears too. It's not crazy what you're saying. It's totally right on. I mean, and I'm not trying to be like accelerationist or anything either. But anyway, maybe I am. So the next, I'll let the audience judge whether I am or not. Okay, so the last assumption I want to share is that market failures and financial failures like 2008, etc. One of the primary drivers of that is that the markets are not embedded into commons. People don't have governance. People are alienated from the technocratic, apparatus that is managing the financial system. There is no proximity to Main Street. There's no proximity to you or me. The feedback loop with the social construction value has been broken. We have, what's the word I'm looking for? Abdicated. I don't put it as like that there's some conspiracy. I think we've abdicated our responsibility to participate in the social construction of value. This is not that's what's going on here. And so the last assumption is, in order for any social construction of value from the spectrum of wampum to 21st century high frequency trading and central bank monetary systems or blockchains or whatever it might be, we have to have the stakeholders and people who are using that participate in the social, directly participate and have participatory, like to Jason's original question about my relationship to worker ownership, etc. There needs to be direct participatory governance of any financialization system, and that otherwise it won't work by the nature of it. And that demands certain considerations of scale and locality and complexity. It forces a forcing function for everything to not be a global panopticon technocratic mess, but instead to be sort of a multi-local process where people are manifesting different versions of a social construction of value that's connected to ecological health in their locality.
I like and agree with the alienation from the technocratic apparatus. I mean, I think broadly assumption 5 resonates to a significant extent. I question your framing of that as abdication, though, as opposed to more of a disenfranchisement.
I mean that's just a personal. That's like it's a choice that I make because I believe in agency and I believe in empowerment, and I don't believe in the victim. I just have no truck with the victim story. So it's just a choice. It very well could be wrong. And it's more of a sort of it's just, I think either way, it kind of doesn't matter, sort of.
That may be.
I choose to sort of be like, I am responsible and I've abdicated my responsibility, and therefore I'm going to do my best to atone for that abdication and be building a community of people that want to also take that responsibility back. instead of, because I find that the other way of disenfranchisement is like, oh, I'm so upset at the globalists and like all these people, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that's just a waste of energy. Like, can we start thinking about solutions? And that's my,
no, for
that's
sure.
my bias.
Yeah, well, that's fair. And I think, and that was really not the form of disenfranchisement that I had in mind. I had more the sort of irrelevance to established institutional capital of most folks, right? And to me, when we think, and now I'm taking Ashley's role and getting way ahead of ourselves, but when we think about how do we make this large systemic transformation, if there is a disenfranchisement, or if we want to frame it as a mass abdication, and we intend to reverse that, then that sort of implies that as part of this transformation, there's an enormous shift in power and a re-enfranchisement or a re-involvement from the once abdicated that
Totally.
is going to perhaps superficially feel like and maybe even be an enormous material loss to the existing powers that be, which to me is it feels like a super interesting challenge, especially on a short time scale. But let me stop getting us way ahead of ourselves, because you're still working through your assumptions. I'm
done with my assumptions, I think.
Okay, so now I need to, we're 59 minutes in or so into the we're just laying the groundwork. What does Regen Network do? What does it do? What are you doing? Tell us what you do.
Yeah, so we're building a public ecological accounting and market infrastructure for people to be able to make claims and generate ecological assets and generate, other types of social construction of value based on real ecological health. And we're trying to build it as flexible and with as many considerations around locality as possible. And also our go-to-market strategy right now is like global, corporate and ReFi, crypto, voluntary carbon markets, right? Because that's an existing marketplace in which people want to pay for ecological health outcomes that we can sell product to, and we can build out an open source infrastructure that can be repurposed at the edges by people who can be utilizing that to express their own social construction of value in service to ecological health.
So I want to let somebody else go, but the vision is basically we're doing this on the scale of like large corporations and large landowners to build the infrastructure wherein sort of more localized versions of this.
Yeah, my bias is that the long tail of local repurposing of the tools that we're building, which are all 100% open source, we're very radical about that, is where the actual change is going to take place. And that's where the actual hope is. And in order to drive that, we have to have a connection with sort of like the institutional existing market. And if you think back of like my comments to Jason earlier, of like, this is a linear journey for me. To me, this is no different from if if you're trying to run an epic regenerative farm, you still got to sell to the market that exists. So you got to like make the market or sell to the market that exists. That doesn't mean that that's all that you're doing at all. That just means that that's sort of like a prerequisite minimum viable thing that must take place. It's necessary, but not sufficient for the change that needs to take place.
There's so much there of great interest for us to talk about. I'm just going to say right now, I'm going to have to take a break at like hour 8 for a little while, but in the meantime, let's press on. Gregory, I appreciated that description. I spent a little bit of time sort of doing a touch of homework. I want to try to like say back to you what I think the large scale initial, pay in the bills strategy for Regen is, just to kind of cross check my understanding and make sure I have it right. The sense that I got was that you're building a platform on which a large landowner or developer could engage with a counterparty, basically, to articulate and instantiate a contract around a certain regenerative action. I've got, however many acres, you want to pay me to offset some carbon, perhaps. I'm a little fuzzy on some of the use cases there, but something of that nature.
Mostly carbon right now, and it is
Okay.
general purpose. So we have more than 40 different really cool projects developing ecological assets or credits that are going to be minted and live on the marketplace. That probably represents something like, I don't know, like 12 million hectares of land of sort of like in our community that's people are like trying to generate an asset, mostly carbon, but there's also biodiversity and water and other cool stuff that's happening. But the bulk of the transactions are going to be carbon credits, and they're going to be carbon credits that adhere to existing institutional standards about additionality and permanence and leakage and verification that are sort of like the parameters of a contract between parties about how long a land steward is going to do what activity and what the science says the carbon outcome is going to be, that then results in a carbon credit issuance that can be sold. And we're trying to basically create a system in which all of the middle people are appropriately encouraged to contribute their value in an open and transparent way, right? And sort of deinstitutionalize a lot of that, because a lot of it is sort of stuck in these kind of like, there's a lot of institutional capture all across our society, but in this space especially. And we're trying to make it possible that, as much of the value flows directly to a landowner and that it's as cheap and easy for them to use and access on their own terms. And even if they so choose, they can participate directly in owning and governing the entire kit and caboodle, the whole thing, the entire public infrastructure we're building, right? That's the aim, not to have sort of like a private black box that sort of like takes care of it for you. Like, we really want there to be an opportunity and accessibility for people to own this process themselves. So yeah, I mean, right now, what we're working on is bringing carbon credits into the blockchain market, which is super efficient. And there's like going to be deep liquidity and people are going to be high frequency trading the carbon. And it's going to be this whole thing. And that's like, okay, like that's a market segment. It's just like, it's like the rich people down the road want my rutabagas. Like, okay, I guess I'll sell you the rutabagas because I got to pay my bills. But that's not the thing that's happening, right? That's the thing is much bigger that's happening. The thing is we're building tools in public with a community of people who want to explore and iterate and research and develop in this sphere of this linking social construction of value to ecological health in a million creative ideas and ways. That's where the exciting stuff is. But we're also going to kick ass over here with minting and having deep liquidity of carbon assets that like raises eyebrows of institutions and gets them bought into the same thing. Because as you mentioned earlier, the bigger problem here is that kind of like all of society has to make this transition, and it has to be mainstream and not just like avant-garde and cool. So there's like gotta be like everybody's kind of gotta see themselves in it. Otherwise it won't actually work, this theory.
So at the level of the carbon market, specifically, just to stay there for a moment, the differentiator of regen is transparency and accessibility, and presumably efficiency along the way. You're performing fundamentally the same action.
We do the same thing, cheaper, better, and more than the existing structure is capable of doing. Yeah, straight up, we're just going to go win. in
Just
the,
going to go disrupt that existing
we're just
thing,
going to
do
go
it
beat
better.
them. Yeah. And we're just
Yep.
going to lower
Yep.
the marginal cost of verification. We're going to lower the marginal cost of minting assets. We're going to make it, the markets more efficient. Like, we're going to do all of those things. We're just going to go win at that.
And so I know there's a bunch there that we all want to talk more about, specifically about verification. I know this is an area that Eshla and I have talked about a lot with regard to this space in general. Because to me, broadly, you know, a challenge that all of these digitize all the things kinds of visions needs to address is how we bridge that analog to digital divide. The sense I got from Regen's public materials was that that has a lot to do with like satellite imaging and broad scale ways to bring to derive knowledge about what's about ground truths in a natively digital form. Am I following that right?
I mean, I think there's an awful lot of cool satellite and AI and machine learning and all sorts of like cool sort of like wizardry. But fundamentally, from a first principle sort of way, all we're doing is building a set of tools that enable any arbitrary group of people to get together and go through a quick intersubjective process in which they agree that something happened somewhere, and they communicate how they made that agreement. And then they, you know, like mint an asset. That's like, there's like a foundational sort of like just process. I like to disrupt our science team and our engineering team all the time by being like, hey, if I can't go write something on a piece of paper that says like this indigenous elder went for a little walk and said that it's all good, and here it is, and I took a picture with my smartphone, and that's the agreement, and that there's like some asset or exchange or contract that's like triggered by that having happened, and people being like, yep, it happened, I saw her do it, then we're doing something wrong, kind of. So it's like,
okay,
you know, it's like we have to, there's like the spectrum we have to stretch. Yes, you know, fundamentally there's a scientific, there's like a, and it's not just, I mean, maybe this is another meta assumption of mine, but it's that right now we and other people are creating the world's largest scientific instrument. And that's both terrifying and exciting. And
right. Okay, but sorry, you go ahead.
Well, it's terrifying because it's like a global surveillance system. It's exciting because it's a global surveillance system.
Yeah, but like, okay, what do you like?
To
what
be
do you
able
mean?
to, but just hold on a second. To be able to know what is happening anywhere in the world with the earth that we all co-inhabit, to be able to know that and to be able to weave that into our decisions and our discourse and our understanding is a powerful thing. It's powerful and exciting, and to have powerful. That be, and I mean, it's exciting, and you can't stop it either. Like, it's just not, you know, it's like you can't stop it. And you can't.
This is terrifying to me, actually, though, because like with
but I could look right now. I could just look at your backyard and I could tell you how healthy your soil is. And that's not anything that I did.
Get out of my backyard.
That's not anything I did. That's something that exists. Like that those are things, those are tools, many of them publicly available, not all of them, that just like they exist, and they exist for good reasons and they exist for bad reasons, but it's just like a hammer. You can do some crazy, horrible things with a hammer.
Right. Well, okay, so here's the thing for me, and I want to let Jason go, although I
just want to say this is financialized interbeing right here.
Kaleo is here. Okay, so real quick, the one thing I just want to acknowledge, like out loud here, is that I think you're trying, I feel like listening to you speak, we're extremely values aligned. If values are social construction, we're constructing it, and I think we have a lot of you know, values in common, at least from me hearing you speak right now. So I hope you see that our criticism is a form of cheerleading. We're so interested in this because I think like figuring out the details of all of this is so essential, I think, in figuring out how do we get where we want to go. For me, I think a lot of it comes down to thinking historically, sociologically, or anthropologically about how people game the system and how power works. Typically, historically, and maybe Jason has a question now because I've been like, me and Josh have been boxing you out of asking any questions. You're like too like thoughtful and like contemplative to jump in and like. But so, anyways, I think it's I think for us like drilling down on the details of like digitalization and who gets included. Does a indigenous elder use the internet is a question. You know what I mean? It's like one of those things where you try to make a tool for everyone in the globe to use. There are going to be there's going to be so much variation that you didn't think of in advance. You know, how does that play out? All of those things. We can dig into those questions a little more, but you know, I guess like to me, just trying to think like, how do humans actually act? I think if all of us are critiquing you, both as like a cheerleader, the critique underlying the critique is, you know, people will game this. So what are we doing about that kind of thing? You know, humans are diverse and strange creatures. Who gets to use this? Power's the thing, you know. Sorry, Jason, you go.
Well, I don't want to. I think your question is good, actually. I mean, there's just, I feel like there's so many strands going everywhere this direction. I have all these notes, go all these different directions. But to what you're saying, Ashley, my kid is telling my cat to sit right now. Sorry, I'm a little distracted.
I can answer Ashley.
Oh, go ahead. I'm too distracted. Go ahead.
Yeah. We'll circle back. Yeah, I mean, critique is great and important and welcome. I think what's important is to like ground that critique in like, it's like to ground that critique and have an actual conversation about it is a whole nother piece. And I think we're getting there. Like, where's my copy of Ted Kaczynski's stuff? Anyway, I mean, look.
We're trying to get away from like Charles Manson, Ted Kaczynski stuff. We're trying to get more mainstream.
But well, Kaczynski did talk about the logic of technology, right? This kind of unyielding logic of technology and capitalism. I don't
agree or disagree with Ted, you know. I don't know. I mean, we'd have to like do a whole thing there to like really dig in. But I sort of like respect and understand that critique, and I totally agree that technology should be rooted in like a cultural and social choice, and there should be deep consideration about its use. Definitely, I agree with that. I think that you could consider me sort of, you know, my belief in like theory of change or activism or whatever, like this like bigger thing that's going on. I looked at things some years ago. I mean, it's been a while since I sort of like made the choice. You know, and those are the choices, the assumptions that I'm sharing, those are real assumptions, you know, and we could dig back in, maybe we could go back, is the assumption that the global financial system, there will be a global financial system and it will be digital, an assumption that, is there a counterfactual to that, or a way in which that assumption could be wrong? I think is, in a way, this is like somehow deeply woven into Ashley, like what maybe in all of us. I mean, and I resonate with that too. You know, is there a possibility that that's wrong? And, you know, and to what degree does what I'm doing like make it more likely that it's true instead of less likely that it's true? I think is like the deeper question that you're really asking.
Yeah, and also like, to what extent digitalization? Like, is every person does every person have a drone flying over their farm,
and I don't even think,
you know what I mean? I
yeah,
think that to me, like, it's also a degree question.
It's a totally degree question, and it should be answered. And that's where I think those are great in easy, like not easy, but I think that that's why this whole system needs to be owned and governed by the people who use it, so that people can express their preferences through governance to say, you know, this is my boundary around like where I relate to things. And like I am not building apps that like every person is going to use in the world. I'm building a decentralized ledger to track ecological health with the tools that we have currently available for people to use current existing tools, not new ones, to make agreements with each other about what's true some particular place in the planet and make an agreement about it that other people can also see, that is not capturable or ownable by some centralized power, that everybody can see and own and participate in because it's related to public goods, right? So that's very different than sort of like, hey, like we're building a, you know, like I am assuming that, you know, over the next 20 years, there is going to be more satellites in the air and more LiDAR technology and more sensors and all those things, because that's just where the world's going. And so we can plug into that and we can relate to that and we can use it for something that's positive and reconnecting, where we're learning more about ourselves and our ecosystems and our farms. But that's a, you know, what we're building is like pretty boring. It's like a people-owned bureaucracy and marketplace that allows folks to issue credits from their farm for something that they think somebody else might find valuable, that is different from just like a commodity that's very easy to reason about. It's about making something that's invisible but is important to all of us visible, so that we can make agreements about it, right? That's like the fundamental nature of what's happening there. And there's so many different ways that can happen.
In a sense, I'm almost tempted to suggest that you're giving a certain class of externalities a seat at the economic table so they can be factored in
100%.
to existing economic decisions.
We're trying, I think in one of our sort of like corporate mission statements or something, it says something about building tools so that the different stakeholders can generate positive externalities together and track and value the fact that that's happened.
So this might be a small point, or it might be a really big point. So the ongoing digitalization, this is also kind of an assumption of kind of the ephemeralization of the technology. So it's actually relying less and less on extractive infrastructure for rare precious metals. I assume it also, you know, it accounts for cleaning up these supply chains, so they're not running according to the logic of, you know, kind of global race to the bottom capitalist dynamics. Also, you know, if we're thinking about this as hyper, like capitalism 2.0 or 4.0 or 5.0 or whatever, and your major clients right now are the biggest players, they're engaging in these markets not because they think that they're going to lose their power. They want to continue to consolidate power. And so this might, I'm throwing kind of just a smorgasbord of questions here. And so this might lead into a question somebody had about, you know, what about the small players, the let's see. I'll just read the question from Brad. How do we prevent large corporations and landowners from taking advantage of these well-intentioned systems? Example, that is Exxon shifting and renewables, similar to how multi 10,000, 100,000 acre landowners have from benefiting the most because large projects are easier to quantify.
Yeah, and I just want to I want to echo that because I had a conversation on this podcast that hasn't yet come out with somebody who runs an organization called Contour Lines, Sean Dixon Sullivan in Guatemala. And basically he was saying like he's had conversations with all different people who do carbon credits, and basically it's like how I consider the organic certification system. It's set up for large scale producers. And so it's just the logic doesn't apply to small scale producers. So I think I think it's a significant question.
Well, there's two layers here. I'll answer the smallholder question first. The way that we're thinking about the smallholder question, I think, is creative and exciting and solves a lot of those issues, which is to build simpler practice and land use classification systems that don't require a huge amount of data, that can still rely on some model to make an estimation about the carbon, and bring those credits to the marketplace and get people paid, while also scaffolding in the appropriate farmer-owned data collection system that's also beneficial for them. And I would sort of point to some great work that's happening at Open Team and other places where there's a lot of attention to open source, farmer-owned, data collection and storage and provision and usage for decision making and planning purposes, as well as provision up into, for verification purposes for some sort of claim. So I think that's moving. I think you're going to see smallholder agroforestry credits really soon. I think, and I also think, we're building tools so that, like, for instance, like the permaculture community could be like, we have a permaculture credit. And the only thing, like, it could be like, because we said so. But you could also say, because Sentinel-2 data showed, according to this algorithm, some specific, like we could tell that there was keyline planting or whatever. I mean, there's some actually pretty simple things. We could tell that there was at least 15%. It's like a PA yeoman's credit. We could tell that there's 15% of, the landscape was set aside for water storage. I mean, there's just a lot of things. That doesn't require like a high granularity of data collection. We could do that now with existing global data sets. And the point here is, and sort of circling back around to the bigger question, how do you avoid this getting captured? Well, we can't abdicate our responsibility. We have to lean in, and people have to, even if it makes them a little uncomfortable, like own, govern, and participate in the system that's going to be financializing your natural capital assets. If not, I can tell you 100% with 100% certainty who will own and govern and use it, right? And so that's happening. There's like NASDAQ natural capital exchanges, like all that stuff's happening. So it's like, from my perspective, and this is like a theory of change thing, like either
different than the poor are poor because they're lazy.
Can you say that again?
How is this argument different than the poor, can easily thrive in the capitalist system? They just need to get a job, work hard, pick themselves up by their bootstraps, but they're lazy, they're degenerate, and so they stay poor. How is this argument?
How is what argument?
No, I would just say to try to draw a parallel here. Okay, people need to participate in the governance of natural capital. Let's just say something like that, and
the social construction of value on the terms that they want.
Right, right. And so I guess like to me,
just like everybody's ancestors always have done.
right. And this is the thing though, for me, the question is like, okay, this is novel though. This is novel, the use of technology, the use of blockchain, all of this sort of thing. Like if I think of just a regular person who like maybe feels
like who can't figure out how to use the CC line in an email, but they're going to draft a smart contract.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think just like, the disconnect between
they don't need to use a smart contract.
The regular guy and the person who like needs to think about how to use, I think
this is the key question.
Yeah, this is the key question, because I think what you're trying to do here is come up with a novel solution that mirrors traditional solutions, but it has to be in a way that's accessible to people. And I think that's partially like the big real question is accessibility,
Well, people will have to learn and grow, and there's a whole lot there. There's a huge bundle there around, and you're right, Jason. Like, I mean, there's a hazard of going too far in one direction, right? There's a hazard in sort of like blaming the victim or whatever. That's a real thing. That's a hazard. I don't think I'm doing that. I think what I'm trying to do is sort of like invite people who are already and are going to be increasingly victims of a global financialization process to like step up and engage with the tools that will allow them to sort of like be productive and proactive in defining the terms that system is going to interact with them.
My question is coming from, just real quick, is kind of the kind of historical, kind of Marxist materialist perspective that in the logic of capitalism, the capital is going to continue to be concentrated, or inequality is going to continue to widen. And no amount of, hey, little guy, like, here's some tools, you can get your share, you can kind of make this part of embed this in your commons. I'd like to believe that, but I'm just, if I'm putting on this kind of like historical materialism perspective, power tends to concentrate, right? Especially in kind of a
well, it comes and goes. I think that is certainly true, and it's also true that it hits a point and it stops, and it goes the other direction sometimes. And
when there's collapse.
I mean, I think it's an interesting, like, what is collapse is a whole talk. That, like you could get Joe Brewer and I on at the same time, and we could debate what that is or isn't, and maybe we'd end up agreeing at the end. But
I enjoyed that talk, by the way. I know what you're referring to.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not a Marxist.
Neither are we, but just
hey, I'm a historical materialist.
I'm not a historical materialist either.
Well,
I'm just not. I mean, I think
I don't know. I don't even know what one can be if they're not a historical materialist. Tell us what you how do you think about these things? Because I don't know.
I get it, and I'm sure I sort of like incorporate that into how I think. But I also think the big, like, my we're not just victims of. So this is maybe like a free will question.
Yeah, totally.
This is at the end of the day, this is about free will. And so look, I don't believe in, so another is like assumption, like let's just get into it. Okay, assumption. Yeah. My assumption is like free will is a bit of a red herring. Of course, there's no free will, but there is will. And you can cultivate your will over time, but most people never will. Most people will be people are going to hate me for saying this, but this is true, I think, based on my experience. Most people will just be like automatons that are basically being influenced by their environment, and they will only, if ever, briefly exercise any agency in their lives. And they will be like historical material, but that is not reality. It's not flat like that. People do, and any person can, any human. This is not like a privileged thing. Any human can actually exercise agency and will. And people do. And it takes effort and consciousness, and you can cultivate practices around it, and you can engage, and you can break yourself out of that, and you can become like, you know, an agent outside of the matrix, and you can like shift the world. And I think what Marx missed is that that is like, it isn't just a mechanism that's just like rolling off into infinity. There's randomness, there's chance, there's agency, there's chaos, there's, you know, all of the beauty and ugliness of all of that. And I wouldn't say, I'm not standing here and saying that I'm even one of those people who has consciousness and agency, right? I think most of the time I don't. I think most of the time I can look back and I can be like, mostly I'm just on autopilot, right? Every once in a while, I think I've had experiences with that wasn't true. And those are startling and scary and sort of like weird, but that's not like my day-to-day. And I don't think it's most people's day-to-day. And I mostly, anytime somebody starts like rambling on about like enlightenment or something, I mostly think that they're full of shit, frankly. But and where am I sourcing this belief from, and this like this like set of ideas maybe is useful for listeners and for you all? I mean, mostly it's just like a Gurdjieffian perspective on consciousness, basically, that I'm sharing. Who thought that we were going to go to Gurdjieff?
I have so much to say. Like, I literally am trying to contain myself. Oh my God. Jason or Josh?
I mean, I have a question that's going to take us in a radically different direction.
Let's get into the code, man. Let's get into the code.
No, but I mean, okay, no, wait, hold on. Let me just say one thing real quick. This sounds a little bit like a pitch that a Silicon Valley bro would love.
That's who I'm shooting for. We got to make them
but
fall
dude,
in
like
love.
this is the critique of you, of like the blockchain stuff, is that it's like a Silicon Valley wet dream that, you know, every person is just this infinite agent, and like and we get to like completely solve the problem of like democracy, of like,
that's not what I'm saying, is it?
No, well, okay, listen, you know, there was a point at which you said, you know, we just basically need like to solve the problem of, you know, individual agents having power over their own lives, more or less. It's like, oh, easy peasy, like the easiest thing in history is just to like solve the problem. Although
yeah, no, I think it's not just I think I'm saying it's necessary, but not sufficient.
I mean, the thing is, like, of course that's the goal. Of course the goal is power to the people and fuck the man. But like the like, how do we get there problem is a problem. And also, like, you know, how do we think of—
Wait a second though. Whenever people start hand waving to me about the how do we get there problem, I just have to say, like, you're talking to a guy who's in like I'm not just standing here. I am not just like,
and
like
we're
blah 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 blah. I've got a bunch of ideas, blah blah blah.
I know. we that's why I'm telling you, I've said it already. We're extremely, the critique is cheerleading. It is because we want you to succeed. We share in the values, but we cannot abide the, yeah, we all hand waving, hey, yeah, we all just need to be in charge of our own destiny. You know what I mean? You know, there's details there that we want to interrogate.
I don't think I said that. Did I say that?
No, well, okay, I'm paraphrasing, but, you know, something along the lines of, you know, we just need, I can't speak Gregory.
I mean, I think this is a good clarifying point. I think that the option to take agency and govern the system needs to be carefully maintained as open, and people who are going to do what needs to be done to step into that need to be able to do so. And that's really an important sort of like design criteria. I don't expect people to just sort of like magically be like, oh, I'm gonna like join a DAO and govern the govern the biosphere.
Josh, you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm maybe driving at the same question that you are, actually, but maybe in a slightly different way. I mean, I'm curious, Gregory, if you could articulate like any sort of even speculative, concrete vision of how. So, first of all, let me say, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what I heard from you as the broad strategy. Like this is happening anyway. The financialization is happening. The technology is happening. The question is, who is going to take the reins and try and steer it somewhere good? And Regen is an attempt to do that. Like, I get that. I think that legitimately buys you an awful lot of freedom from some of the criticisms that we're waging, because the non-uniqueness problem is very real. Let's just set that aside. I also, you were very clear that that's not where you see what I believe you called the real hope, right? That the real hope was out at the edges when we could, what I heard, and I'm definitely paraphrasing here, was like, we would sort of, you would build a platform to co-opt the man's existing attempt at financialization, use that as sort of subsidized development of the platform, so that now there would be this tool, this open tool that could be repurposed for these other purposes. I have sort of two related questions. One is, even when we're talking about the market you are actively building right now, I'm unclear on the mechanics of how stake in that market, not in the blockchain sense, but just in the governance sense, how agency in that market comes to be held by anyone other than either the large piles of money trying to sell carbon credits, or the large piles of money trying to earn carbon credits to be sold. Sorry, it said that backwards, but I think you're with me. So how does anyone else get involved in that? And then secondly, related, what would it look like for that platform to be used out at the edges? Like, what's any example of where we would have a smaller scale or more local thing that also wants that financialization? And I mean, it's probably an imagination failing on my part, frankly, but help. You've clearly thought about these things a lot.
Sure. So the first question is a good one. There's sort of two main ways to, I guess, or there are several ways to earn or purchase or be granted ownership stake in the network. So it's a proof of stake system. So this is a blockchain question, actually. And there are some issues with proof of stake, but that's what we're going with because it's what's available in a practical sort of sense.
Right.
It also sort of like resonates with the social construction of value thing, because people are doing that together and they own stake in the system. You can go, if you're sort of like a crypto Silicon Valley bro, you could go to a decentralized exchange and you could pick up some regen and you could stake it on a validator and you can participate in governance and you can earn rewards and fees, and that's cool. If you're
Can you describe what proof of stake is just briefly? I don't know if that will take a lot of time, but I think it's important for people who are not in crypto.
Yeah, so there are different, before I do that, we'll circle back around and we'll do like a crypto 101, because we haven't even gotten into crypto. I feel like people are going to think I'm crazy. But anyway,
there's so many.
It's a good sorting function for the audience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna we'll get back to that. So the other function, which we very early on recognized that it would be a type 1 error if we made governance only available through sort of like a financial exchange system that was only available to a small group of humans who, however, is also sort of like a necessity that was part of the equation for a number of different reasons. So there's all these rich tensions and paradoxes in everything I'm doing. I would fully admit it. So what we did is we set aside about 35% of the staking tokens, which is enough stake to halt the network. It's like a union veto. You could like walk out and the thing will stop working. Basically, we set aside, because that's and there's a whole proof of stake thing there. So we set that aside. That's governed. 5% of that stake is sort of like owned and governed by a 501c3 not-for-profit organization with an independent board and an executive director, Ravathi Kungali, who lives in southern India and worked with Vandana Shiva on women's cooperative work and has been thinking a lot about digital divide work and sort of empowering groups on the edges, and sort of like her whole career and her whole mindset is in this question. And that 501c3 stewards the other 30% to make grants to groups that would like to participate in bringing ecological credits or governing the financial infrastructure. So there are a variety of different groups that are in the process around that. I think we have 5 or 6 groups. We have 2 groups that are in and sort of like active, and then we have 5 or 6 more that are coming in. And that's going to be like a multi-year process to sort of build capacity and endow groups with these staking tokens. And that's a like completely non-trivial, giant, monumental task that is handled by an institution that we've tried to build and fund to do just that, like exactly that work. So your other,
I mean, just to pause there and make sure I'm following an imperfect analogy, but I guess this feels like it's maybe equivalent to saying, hey, we set aside, 2 of 5 board seats for, representatives from a nonprofit, for example.
Yeah, something like that, except for it's like, 35 million tokens, which can be split a variety of different ways, and you can create a much more pluralistic and interesting sort of like governance mechanism than trying to cram 2 sort of like diversity board seats.
Yeah, fair enough.
And and unlike a 2 out of 5 voting system, this could actually like halt the network. If all of those people agreed, like 2 out of 5 in a board vote just get steamrolled, it's more like, this actually would be like, oh, network not working because people unhappy with how network operating. They could also, unlike a corporate setting, in blockchain-y world, you can fork it. And so this group could, like actually create its own autonomous, independent, completely wholly owned by that community representation of how to actually do ecological value system on its own autonomously, which is part of the like little glimmer of hope. So like, the Rebel Alliance can sort of like scoot along and engage in all these ways, and then just like have its own space that is, could be completely radically different, but could be funded the whole time, in sort of like, and related and learning and growing in a pretty powerful way. So what's blockchain? What's proof of stake, proof of work? Listeners, probably many of the listeners are like, what? This guy's building on a blockchain, that's going to destroy the planet. Don't those NFTs like kill elephants? And isn't Bitcoin
I'm thinking like even lower level than that. Like what? I've never heard of a blockchain. What is that?
Yeah, well, exactly. Okay, well, if you've never heard of a blockchain, that's okay. So okay, so
but you need to be able to explain this kind of thing. I mean, this is us cheerleading. You have to be able to give us the most basic version of what you're doing and why it's a solution to anyone.
I've gotten this far making people take the stairs. I'm not so sure, but anyway, I'll do my best. So blockchain is a amalgamation of different technologies that creates that creates consensus amongst a network of computers about the database that is running on that network of computers. And there's different ways that consensus is achieved and upheld. And those are the proof of work and proof of stake. Why is that interesting or important? I think is an important question. It's interesting and important because it creates sort of a censorship-proof medium to track the exchange of value. And it's important that people understand, like Bitcoin, the original blockchain, was launched in 2008 as a response to the financial crisis that was catalyzed by the subprime mortgage crisis and other things. And it was directly a response to sort of like a central banking system in which the people who were using US dollars had no control. And, you know, the critique, you know, and there's all this sort of like ideology and there's all and philosophy baked into that, but it's sort of a critique of the way that modern monetary theory is sort of playing out at the moment, in which there's technocrats who can sort of, you know, print money in order to control the economy, basically. And, you know, and so this technology was an amalgamation that could say, oh, hey, already most of the exchange is happening digitally. What if we could create a censorship-resistant, durable network that allowed people to exchange with one another? And what if we encoded it with a fixed number of, fixed number of units, and so that nobody could inflate the supply or change it, and everybody knows that that's just what it is. And, you know, if you run the computer, you could earn some. And so, like, that's Bitcoin. It's basically encoding it's encoding an economic game into a set of computers. And then there's mechanisms for how does it run, you know, how do you actually generate new Bitcoins, you know, how is it actually censorship resistant, and like what's the magic behind it? You know, we have this concept of a consensus algorithm, which is basically what is creating, it's the mechanism by which this network is maintaining consensus about where are those Bitcoins in the network, or in our case, where are those Regen tokens in the network, or where are those carbon credits in the network. That is maintained through an algorithm and a system. And in the Bitcoin network, which is proof of work, it's basically maintained by a bunch of brute force computing, in which computers are algorithmically racing each other to solve complex cryptographic problems. And when they win, it's kind of like winning the lottery, and you get distributed some Bitcoin. So they all just keep racing, and they're going to just keep racing. And it's basically a function of your pure compute power, which is in turn a function of how much electricity you can burn, basically. And that's why Bitcoin burns a huge amount of electricity. You know, we could go in a whole thing, is that good or bad or what? But that's Bitcoin. We're running with a consensus mechanism called proof of stake, Tendermint proof of stake to be exact, which enables the virtualization of that computational race, basically. So instead of a bunch of computers competing against each other, that lottery to distribute who's voting and securing the network and the turns in the game to sort of distribute things out and all of that has been virtualized. And these are digital tokens that just run on a simple computer server. That isn't, so it's like something like 20,000 times more energy efficient. So in an order of magnitude thing, like Bitcoin is using about the energy of like a medium-sized nation state like Denmark or Colombia or something like that. And our network, you know, which is global and has nodes on every continent except for Antarctica, you know, and is storing some amount of ecological state data, and that will increase over time. But at the moment, there's a little bit happening, you know, and there's stuff happening. We have like 8,000 users and all these things. Yeah, we use the energy of something like 40 or 50 US households to run the network, right? So that's like not a lot of energy. I mean, for somebody who's like, doesn't think that using any energy is good, that's, you know,
yeah,
like
and
50 times more than you should be using.
Yeah,
but
and I think the scale is really important. I think trying to think about that is incredibly important, because you know, if it's a tool that's, you know, you get so much out of a little bit of energy use, I think you can justify it philosophically. I want to let Josh or Jason ask a question, but I want to make a comment first, because it's my MO. I just want to acknowledge the extent to which you've like thought through really complex questions and have extremely specific and practical and actionable solutions to those problems. I remain skeptical about how these things will play out over time, just because I'm like a sociologist and think about how humans act. That doesn't mean that I'm not like cheering you on. And I just want to say that out loud before we wrap up, because I know we're getting close to the 2-hour mark. Josh or Jason?
I'm not in a hurry, by the way, so I don't know if other people need to wrap up. You know,
no, not really. I'm okay.
I don't want
no
to end before, you know, before it's interesting, you know, before the
right. Okay. So then fine. I'll ask this question. Like, how are you managing the complexity of holding in so many of these thoughts at once about like historically how things work anthropologically, and all these new-ish tools to humanity? Like, how are you holding all of that in? Like, how is it working on a practical level? Like, I think some of the things we hear you talking about, or at least like when I hear you, I'm just like, oh my God, yeah, that sounds so great. But then I think about like how organizations actually work and like working with people. Like what is that? How does that translate? Like you've got like this big picture vision, and like what does that mean for managing a team of people who are just like trying to enact this big picture vision that probably has all sorts of hiccups, and it's like a million moving parts. It's global. It's new technology based on your specific assumptions about historical anthropology. Like, you know what I mean? And I guess that kind of relates to a question we asked you earlier in the group chat when we were pre-gaming this conversation. Like, like I guess, how does doomer optimism, the concept, sort of resonate with you? And for me, doomer optimism is just this problem. Like, how do we solve so many of these things at once? And so I wonder, yeah, I wonder how it's working on a practical day-to-day level, but I also wonder, you know, like, do you think of yourself as a doomer optimist? Do you think of yourself as some person who's trying to like take the best from the past and the best from the present and forge something new?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a bunch of different questions in there. I'll start with how does this actually work or not work with a team? I mean, probably my team is frustrated by me regularly. And I think we get a lot done. So look, at Regen Network, where are we at as a community? Maybe 8,000 or 9,000 different addresses. Our R&D Inc., which is the software company and science company that's building this and also doing science work, around verification and quantification of ecological health and carbon, and maintains the Cosmos SDK, which is the world's most used proof of stake software, securing over $150 billion worth of assets, including our own. So we maintain a public open source project with a big community of other people, but we're like the lead maintainers. We have 35 team members on R&D Inc. We're expanding to 40 or more, maybe up to 50. I don't really want to get bigger than that. I'm quite worried about getting bigger than that. I think there's organizational issues and network issues with too many people being in the same organization. I mean, it's challenging. We're doing complex things. I think, people resonate with the vision, and hopefully we attract people who are willing to sort of like sit with some ambiguity and complexity, while also being able to sort of, at the end of the day, kind of be like, okay, like, what are we doing in the next 3 months? Like, what's the thing that we're doing now that fits into that? And, and so that's where there's pretty practical, I think, go-to-market strategy, and we're building software, and we have a release cycle, and we have sprint cycles, and we practice agile software development, and all of these sorts of things, right? But also we try to create a culture that we can ask hard questions and critique. There's an awful lot of like critiques of blockchain and financialization of nature stuff that happens in our internal channels, so there's like a pretty strong culture. Like, people are watching YouTube videos of like what could go wrong, and like why things may not work, or how NFTs are scams, or whatever it is that's like moving around. So there's also a lot of that going on. Like, I guess we're not a culture of sort of like and I think I'm not this type of person either, of sort of like rabid evangelical dogmatists, I guess. That's not really how things work. And then there's Regen Foundation, which I was explaining, and I think they're a team of like 6 or 7 at this point, and like a broader community. And then there's other organizations, right, that we collaborate with, or working, or developing eco credits, or developing software bits and pieces, and everybody's kind of in the crazy chaos of the Discord server and other things, and chatting, and I have to say, honestly, I spend way too much time on my computer. That's a big negative. There's elements of this that are super stressful. I do believe that there's something that's important. I kind of feel like I'm sort of taking one for the team. This isn't the lifestyle that I would choose, right? I wouldn't choose to be doing this. I mean, I am choosing, right? But I wouldn't sort of like, if I was to say, what do I want to do from 9 to 5 every day that would give me the most joy and be healthiest for my being, this isn't the answer to that.
Right.
There are certain things about it that are attractive and dynamic, and I love working with the team, and there's creativity involved. But, I think if I was to do something in sort of like a millennial self-centric sort of way, that I was like, I'm just going to do me, I would probably be like, with my family, walking and sailing around the world, visiting friends on farms and lending a hand. And it'd be pretty simple, right? Like, I feel like I'm doing this because it has to be, like, a bunch of these things like have to be done, basically. That's my perception, right? According to those assumptions, like, if that's the world, like, it's like gotta kind of like lean in and like engage with that's happening, and try to pull it in and ground it and root it. And there's probably, we may fail. The chances of failure are very high, I would say. I was having a Twitter back and forth, and like, I think, probably 99% chance of failure, but the 1% chance of success is, I mean, Luke got those torpedoes down the Death Star. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, so anyway,
Well, and
think
there's likely progress even in failure, right? A
Totally.
decent percentage of that 99% will move the collective ball forward, even if you
Hugely.
don't, you know.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there'll be already, I think we've already achieved different fairly large things that are going to set like there's a community of people who are activated and engaged and asking hard questions and trying to answer them in a creative way, and building their capacity to think and code and do science and apply that to small scale regenerative agriculture and land use and thinking about, you know, agreements. And so, like, if nothing else, like if things stopped today and everything was just like, the show's over, folks, I think actually it would be sort of like a pretty huge net win in a lot of ways. And we're nowhere near like shuttering our doors. Like, things are actually going really well, you know, in a lot of ways. Like, there's momentum, there's market adoption, there's lots of stuff is happening. It's exciting. But I do want to just be honest with folks. It's like, you know, when you're talking, and we didn't get into this, I remember in our chat, we had talked about sort of like entrepreneurial failure stories and sort of like what's it really like, and in the depths and the trenches, like, yeah, I mean, doing this kind of work, it has lots of cost to it. And that cost is personal, it's familial, it's like mental health, it's screen, it's physical health. You know, I mean, there's a million ways I could be doing things better, and we could be doing things better. And I mean, gosh, it's like, it's not all just, you know, yeah, it can be hard. You know, like right now, I live on a beautiful maple farm that I'm lucky enough to have purchased with my family. You know, I went in on it with my parents. You know, it's like a multi-generational thing. It's really exciting. It's beautiful. Right now, the sap is flowing. You know, my dad's down there, and I've got some friends working, and I'm like watching it from my window. You know, and I get out and I go tap and I do some stuff, and I like maintain my little things, and I tinker, and I have my plans, and I'm working with friends to design and implement. You know, I have a permaculture background. Like, I know people, I know nurseries, like I can get stuff done and keep it moving. But you know, there's a sadness of like, I'm sitting here, I'm looking out my window at like the life I kind of want to live, actually, at the end of the day. So that's real. That's a real sort of like that's an emotional reality for me as a human. I want to go like hang out with my kids and do stuff on the farm. And instead I'm on my computer a lot.
Josh, you must have some sort of follow-up.
I don't have a follow-up. I have a completely unrelated question.
Oh, go
for it.
And it's perhaps a bit flippant. I'm certain, Gregory, you've heard the comparisons to the Kim Stanley Robinson book, Ministry of the Future, with its substantially similar plot line. I'm curious, from your much more knowledgeable perspective about what you're doing, I'd love a short compare and contrast between that plot line and Regen.
I would briefly like to plug the fact that Stan and I had a really fantastic several-hour-long conversation on my podcast.
I listened to it.
Oh, really?
Nice.
That people should go check out. We mostly didn't talk about Ministry for the Future because it was more fun to just like talk with him about stuff, and I think he was kind of bored of talking about Ministry.
I remember that you guys, there was a point of tension where you were talking about markets, and he said something like,
he's like not a market fan.
He's not into the market side of what you're doing. And so maybe that might be part of the difference because he has the carbon coin in Ministry for the Future.
Which is Delton Chen, which there's also a couple people want to like dig into that whole Ministry for the Future thing. It's very resonant with Regen. It's very resonant with Delton Chen's work on the global carbon reward. And I would say there's a couple things. Like, first off, Kim Stanley Robinson, huge inspiration for me. One of my favorite authors. I'm an avid sci-fi reader, and I I was crying in that book a lot because, you know, like there's a whole list of projects. I knew like 20 of those projects. You know, I know the person who put together the list that those projects were coming from. I mean, it's just such a beautiful story. Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful story. It's also kind of like a catalog of like what we need to do. So there's elements of that. It's like some parts of it are like not as good of a story as sometimes he writes, but it was great. It's awesome book. I mean, I think what's different is my thinking is that I actually have some faith that the central banks may adopt something like that. I don't think that's a completely implausible thing. It sort of fits general trajectory. I think it becomes more likely the more that we do what we're doing and we are out in front, piloting, prototyping, and building.
Yeah.
So I think that's true. I also think, you know, if you paid close attention in Ministry for the Future, there is like this moment where the Ministry for the Future itself has its like alternative sort of like co-op bank that's like, if you guys don't do this, we're going to do it ourselves, right? Moment with the central banks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's like that element of the plotline. I think that resonates with me. That sort of like, I think what we're doing at Regen is like a forcing function. So whether or not we become the thing or a thing that's sort of like fully alive and embedded in the way that it's all working, I think we sort of like force some really important and hard conversations and assessments to take place. And ideally, if we can get our critics to be involved with this as a way of expressing an alternative way, it's actually sort of like from an institutional theory of change perspective, it like creates the platform to force harder conversations and better processes at a level that we wouldn't ourselves be able to really do or presume to be able to achieve. So there's an element of that, like sort of be piratey, get out in front and do it in sort of like a more grassroots ad hoc way, make it all open source, tell a really great story about it, and expect it to all get stolen. You know, and some of it to be adopted. And hopefully that's like significant, like that change is significant enough that things actually are different, not in a like hand wavy, like, whoa, we fixed it all, but in like, yeah, maybe we like, you know, that 1%, like we just moved things enough that, okay, wow, that's actually significant for a lot of people's lives, for a significant part of the planet. Yeah, so that's my sort of like Stan riff.
Yeah, you know,
cool.
I just have to say, I think this conversation's been so great for me. I don't know, maybe it's my like very liberal-ish background, or like going to a college that just like like what you learn in college is just how to like critically take things apart. And so I think like thinking about your project as like this really big moonshot kind of thing, and how you're thinking through things in a way that is like completely values aligned, as far as, you know, I can tell. And I think like it's not hubristic at all. I mean, I think just hearing you just now thinking about you know, just moving the needle a bit, I think like more or less is what we're trying to do here with Doomer Optimism, is just move the needle just enough. And Joe Norman talks about this, like, you know, you've got your systems going in some sort of direction, and when some sort of total disorganization happens with a complex system, just one tiny little percentage of things going in one direction can shift the direction that disorganization ends up reorganizing as. And so I
100%.
think,
I totally resonate with that.
So thinking about your project and our project and all of this is like, it's not hubristic, it's the opposite of that. It's like just doing teeny amounts of trying to make little bits of system change so that when things are chaotic and disorganized, they when they're ready to reorganize, they tip in one direction or another. I think more or less is the vision for what we have going on here. Jason, you haven't spoken for a moment. I don't know if you have anything to say before we wrap up.
Well, it might be, now that you brought in kind of, it does seem like our values are mostly aligned, and I'm curious, how
I love this cat. I love this cat interruption that Jason always is either a child or a cat.
So we've been kind of interrogating you, and you've done very well. How if you were to critique doomer optimism, both critique it, but also what you critique, and also what you like, and what you see the potential of doomer optimism is, as well as how it can interface with Regen Network and regenerative, blockchain and finance and things. How do you see these kind of two, this Venn diagram, where we're meeting in the middle?
Yeah. Shall we do the critique first?
Let's do it. Don't be as harsh as you were with the eco villages. I can't.
No, you should be as harsh as you want. No. I want it straight. Be as harsh as you want.
Oh my God.
Come on, Ashley. You can't hide from reality. Doomer before optimism.
Yeah, okay.
Stabilize the doom.
You can handle it.
I don't think it'll be that bad. Let's see. I mean, I think so. It's dynamic. I mean, one thing, like starting with positives, I mean, doomer optimism is very dynamic, and it's clearly evolving, and it's clearly not sort of like a static, ossified, calcified, sort of like retrograde sort of straw man thing, right? So it's not that. It's living, it's alive, there's conversations that we can witness each other moving and evolving our thinking, or coming up with new perceptions. So that's really great. So I think a lot of my, there's not even a lot, but the roots of any of my critiques probably mostly were born from my witnessing the birth of doomer optimism, and my perception of naivete of doomer optimist founders, some of which may or may not be on this call.
It's just me and you, Jason.
And as someone who, at the point that was like when I was getting on Twitter, that was like when I wasn't really on Twitter before that. There was some like magical, mystical alignment, which like was like, oh, I'm building a crypto network in public, and I need to be on Twitter. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go on to Twitter, which I wouldn't have been doing otherwise. And then somehow, I guess I tuned into Jason, maybe. I was like, oh, this guy's a good shit poster. This is really entertaining and like Metamodern, cool, and bumped into you, Ashley, and just sort of like got into the swirl, got like, ran across Joe, and, it's sort of like, I think I oftentimes experienced things that were being said and tweeted about from my perspective as sort of like, yeah, this is like a group of people who'd like just found out about permaculture like last month, and like, and a bunch of other ideas. And I was like, okay, like, cool. That would be my big critique is back then, is like, that was my experience. And I was like, you know,
You're
probably
waiting for people to catch up. Okay, I can respect that. I mean, there is like a thing I see over and over again. It's just like I'll be like, you know, tweet out like, has anyone ever done X? And then some person will link back to a tweet they did like 5 years ago, and I'm just like, you know, whatever person is just waiting for us to catch up. You know, like they've been thinking about this kind of thing, and part of the idea is trying to get people up to speed. So yeah, that's.
But it's awesome, and learning in like so like my critique is sort of silly in a way, because learning in public, building community around things that are important, being willing to ask questions and make statements and like stand behind them and have dialogue and like get into deep reply threads and like have actual substantive conversations and then have them in these sorts of venues and sort of evolve, that is all amazing and super cool, and I'm just a big fan of it, and you know, and a participant. You know, I'm like, oh, I'm excited to like hear where the conversation goes. So most of that critique is kind of stupid, really, and it's sort of like Gregory being a curmudgeon, meaningless curmudgeon. It's like it's like the part of me, I do this in crypto sometimes too with the ReFi movement. I'm pretty sure I came up with the ReFi thing. And now it's fucking crazy. And I feel like an old man who's like shouting at the kids to get off my fucking lawn. And then I'm like, but wait, it's not actually my lawn. And it actually actually this is success. like why am I upset about this? This is like awesome. Why am I being,
we all win when anyone wins? So yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's, you know, that's just more, I think, an indication of my own psychological issues than a critique on doomer optimism, really. What was the other part of the question?
What was the other question?
Venn diagram.
Oh yeah.
Overlap. Well, I think there's a really great, I mean, I haven't had the time to engage in the way that I want to with stuff that I find really exciting, which is, what if Regen Network was being actively explored and used by sort of like smallholder homesteader folks to create their own version as quickly as possible of what it looks like to be valuing each other's ecological success. And to actually like take the reins of that and not be prescriptive, to be like, what would a group of people need to do to trust each other, that they're generating sort of like ecological abundance through the practices of regeneration and stewardship that they're following, and to share that, and to define, like, this is where we set the thresholds, and this is how we verify with one another, and this is the units of account that we create, and this is how we're going to experiment and exchange in that's like so rich and so exciting for me, because that's aesthetically and from a values perspective and like the community I want to live in and the type of money I want to use. That's it. It's not some institutional carbon credit thing. It's like it's like a group of peers who are defining a socially constructed system of value that reflects a commitment to ecological health. And so I would be, I guess I would make the invitation that if there's any way that I can support, or our company or our network can support that, and it won't be easy. There's no like active template, where this is like the bleeding chaotic edge of like crazy emerging technology and other things. So it's not just like, yeah, here's a template, like fill this out and we'll like send you, it requires more attention and care than that. But if that's at all exciting, that would be like, that would hit the Venn diagram right in the middle, I think.
It seems to me like maybe we should do some sort of follow-up, like literal, I don't know if it's like this is what it takes, but like some literal walkthrough, if where you like screen share and show us how that works, because I think we're like at 10,000 feet, and I think thinking about like how the practicalities work, like show us you know, if you're X person and you're a homesteader and you have your farm, you know, how would one do that would be, I think, a worthwhile follow-up.
Well, I think that's sort of like putting the ball in my court, maybe in a way that wouldn't work so well. I would sort of want to really do this. I think what I'd want to do is step back and say sort of what would we maybe, like, and I'll include myself in this, as technology skeptics, as, you know, as people who love the, you know, the natural world and want to live in a particular way with our families and our communities. What does it look like to create trust and some consensus about, you know, performing in a particular way that we could all value, that we could all say, like, yeah, I that's a cool, like, the hardness of drilling that bead or the hardness of mining that Bitcoin. Okay, we have a system to represent the hardness of doing regenerative homesteading or living a doomer optimist lifestyle the right way, right? And if there was, like, that's more of like a social question than it is a technological question. I actually think that's the right place to start, because then we can match that up to what does or doesn't exist in Regen Network, and we can build something that supports that together. But I think it's a better place to start, which is more like, is there at least some amount of people who think that that's awesome? And I want, like, cool, I want to earn my, you know, like, digital doomer optimism credit, you know, by participating, by putting the work in. Not, you know, and like, it will be valuable to me because I've done it, and that will socially construct value that's meaningful and can form the foundation of exchange between peers or whatever it might be. That, you know, and maybe other people will find it valuable too. Maybe other people will be like, oh, I'm supporting the world by, you know, purchasing this, by supporting price discovery. Or maybe it's not a market mechanism. I'm totally open to be like, no, it shouldn't be. It should be some other thing. It will define some other non-market based, you know, system. Although I tend to think that, you know, markets are everywhere. Unlike,
I mean, it would be cool. It would be cool, like, even as a thought experiment to walk through that together. So I definitely think when things open up, we should when we have a moment, maybe we should do this again, even just to show what the conversation might look like. You know, I think that's great.
The DO coin in 5 years, when we have the robust, you know, decentralized network of DO coins, it'll have been birthed. The idea will have been birthed here.
Yeah.
And, you know, we'll have the DO DAO, of course, because that's
the do DAO, and the do coin,
and we will be masters of the universe. We will distribute funds where they need to go based on our algorithms, and the earth will be regenerated, and communities will be happy and joyful and culturally enlivened and enriched.
Yeah.
And the coin will facilitate.
I can't tell if you're being
Problem
a little
solved.
Facetious or
a little bit of
like
both.
Fully facetious or
ironic sincerity. Ironic sincerity.
That's good.
Yeah. I mean,
sincere. No, ironic sincerity. Yeah, ironic sincerity. There we go.
Yeah. So Gregory, I just want to thank you so much for coming on. This was so great. I'm totally a convert. I must be a Silicon Valley bro, because I've totally been sold the bill. I think it's great. I think it's a lovely project. I'm totally in support. I'm gonna never stop being skeptical, because I think that helps us all.
Yeah.
I don't want to go into groupthink ever. That's like the main thing. That is like, my religion is anti-cult. Anyways, I just want to thank you. I don't know if Jason or Josh, you have any last comments, but this was awesome.
Yeah,
it was indeed.
Thanks
Right,
for
Jason.
subjecting yourself to this. It got a little lively, and that was nice. I was having fun the whole time with the liveliness. I don't think anybody was getting too hurt about it.
I do think we did solve the free will versus determinism problem, so that was good.
Well,
Yeah.
it's actually such an easy problem to solve. I'm sort of like, I don't understand why more people don't get that one, but
Yeah.
it's not either or. It's like a yes and. But anyway, that's somebody had a podcast about that. Anyway.
All right, cool. So yeah, it's like past midnight for me, so I'm gonna call it an evening. Yeah, this is great. I'm so glad, and we should definitely do a follow-up. Trace is probably just gonna cut this wherever he feels like it's funny to cut it. And cool. This was great. This was so great. I'm sorry I missed the first couple minutes, but yeah.
Next time we're going to get to the most important issue that we didn't cover here, which is